Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Dalid, and Mirza Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Yud Dalid Amid Aleph. Another exciting day in the halachas of Hoitzah. So we pick up today on the top line of Reish Yud Dalid Amid Aleph, Siman Shin Nun Ches Sif Yud Beis, continuing to learn the halachas of a karpef. Karpef yosim beis asayim. In order for it to be mutter, to be metaltal yosim dalad amis inside that karpef, it has to be hukaf ledira. We're not going to reiterate what we have already reiterated so many times, but that is the theme that we are discussing. Our learning today should be Yischos for Achenu Kabeis Yisroel Hanasunim Batzara Bashivya Haimdim Bein Bayam Bein Bayabasha Hamakim Yerachim Aleim V'Yitziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'Ira Mishiber L'Geula Hashta Bagolo V'Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be Yischos for Shalema for Meir V'Rabbi Rav Shalom Ruvain Ben Shima, for Achi Agadol Moshemer Ben Esther Fradel Yitzchak Ben Tzion Ben Dusha Rivka Bashir Aleah Chavadasa Bas Rezel Sarah Chava Hadassah Bas Rezel Serel. You'd think I've said that name, unfortunately, so many times. You'd think it would just roll off my tongue properly, but somehow not. Yeshua Levi ben Ahua Malkachana and Gila Shofar Bas Ilana Udal, they should all have a refuah shalema b'soich shar choyle Yisroel. So let's pick up here right away. Siman Shin Nun Ches Sif Yud Beis, top line, Reish Yud Daled Amud Aleph, says the Mechaber. Karpef base shloisha sa'in. You have a karpef that's not a base sasayim. It's not 5,000 square amas. It is shloisha sa'in. It's 7,500 square amas. Certainly, it would have to be hukaf l'shem dira in order for you to be allowed to be metaltal yosim dalad amas inside this kira, inside this karpef. Now, what did you do? Says the Mechaber. V'keira mimenu base saw. You went to a 1 saw area of this 3 saw karpef and you roofed it over. Okay, so now you have a karpef, it's bas shloisha sa'in, it's an area of 3 saw. You took a section of it, that's the area of 1 saw, and you roofed it over. So now you have 2 saw that are not roofed, 1 saw that is roofed. Says the Mechaber, mutter, you're now allowed to carry anywhere. You could be metaltal yosim dalad amas anywhere inside this karpef, and the Mechaber closes off the sif by saying afilu im hakiroi mishupa. This is true even if the roof that you created over the 1 saw area is not a flat roof, it is a slanted roof. What's going on over here? What's at play over here? So let me just give you a heads up before we see the Mishnah Berurah. We are already very familiar with the halacha l'moshe misinai of good achis, the halacha l'moshe misinai of good asik, which teaches us that when you have a partial wall, you have the classic case that we've been dealing with since the beginning of Chelik Dalid. You have a tail, Rishus Harabim. You have a raised platform, a raised mound inside the Rishus Harabim. The upper surface of it is more than Daled al Daled, and it's elevated more than 10 tfachim above the Rishus Harabim. So what do? We say that the outer walls, the outer surfaces of this tail, so those are the vertical walls that go from the top of the platform down to the ground, right? We extend them up. We use good asik, and we say that halacha l'moshe misinai, we extend those side mechitzas going up. So now the top surface of the tail is considered to be surrounded by mechitzas. Really? Where are they? We can't see them. They're not physical mechitzas. They're halacha l'moshe misinai mechitzas. But they're halacha l'moshe misinai mechitzas, they are halachic mechitzas. So yes, good asik tells us that the top of the tail is surrounded by mechitzas. Today, we're introducing a new halacha l'moshe misinai of mechitzas, which is known as pi tikra yorid v'saisim. When you have a roof, let's imagine that this is a roof. See, the roof has an edge, right? Where the roof ends, you have a nice roof here. Where the roof ends, you have an edge. Now, I'm using a sefer in order to portray this, but it is mutter lahalacha to do this. This is not a bezayin chas v'shalom for the sefer, because this is lehislamid. This is for the purpose of teaching Torah, so it's mutter. So let's say this is the roof, right? This edge of the roof is what we call the pi tikra. That's the edge of the roof. Pi tikra yored v'saisim means that halakha l'moshe misinai allows us to draw a mechitza down from the edge of the roof, going down to the ground. Now, there's all sorts of, issues. How thick does the edge of the roof have to be, etc., etc. We'll get to that in another time and place. But right now, what we're using over here is this halakha l'misinai, halakha l'moshe misinai, pi tikra yored v'saisim. So we have a karpef that is 3 sa. As a karpef of 3 sa, it needs to be hukaf l'shem dira in order for you to be allowed to be metaltal yosim midalad amas inside that area. But this karpef was not hukaf l'shem dira. This is hukaf shaloi l'shem dira. So 3 sa, you're not allowed to be metaltal yosim midalad amas inside it. Oh, you went ahead and you roofed over 1 sa. If you roofed over 1 sa, then when we get to the edge of that roof, so that's the line that separates between the 1 sa section that you roofed over and the 2 sa section that you did not roof over, we could now drop a mechitza, pi tikra yored v'saisim. We're going to drop a mechitza between the 1 sa area and the 2 sa area. Oh, by dropping that mechitza, we no longer have a karpef that's yoser mi beis sasayim. Now we have one karpef that's 1 sa. All right, a karpef of 1 sa, even if it's hukav shaloi l'shem dira, no problem. You're allowed to be metaltal yoser midalad amas. Then next door to it, we have another karpef, which is sasayim. It's not yoser mi beis sasayim, it is sasayim. So guess what? That karpef also, if it's not hukav l'shem dira, so what? You're allowed to carry. It's not yoser mi beis sasayim. That's what's going on over here. The last phrase of the Mechaber, where the Mechaber said that you're allowed to do this even if the roof is slanted, the reason that's a chiddush is because usually when a roof is slanted, we do not say pi tikra yored v'saisim. Usually we only say pi tikra yored v'saisim if the roof is flat. If it's slanted, we don't say that. Why? Again, we'll get to that another time and another place. The chiddush is that over here, we do say pi tikra yored v'saisim, even though the roof is slanted. Again, we now have a mechitza dividing the 1 sa area and the 2 sa area. We no longer have a karpef that's yoser mi beis sasayim. It doesn't have to be hukaf l'shem dira, and you're allowed to be metaltal in both parts of it. Yoser midalad amas. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Tzadik Aleph. Says the Mishnah Berurah Mutter Shepi Tikra Yored V'Saisim. We are employing the halacha l'moshe misinai of Pi Tikra Yored V'Saisim. V'hevi ki'ilu mechitza mafsekes bein asa hamakura. And now it's as if we have a mechitza that is separating and dividing between the 1 sa area hamakura that is roofed over lebeis sasayim to the 2 sa area she'ein hamakura that is not roofed over. V'nimtza she'ein sham el beis sasayim. And now, even that larger area is only a beis sasayim. It's not yoser mi beis sasayim, it's only a beis sasayim. So neither area needs to be hukaf l'shem dira. You're allowed to be metaltal yoser midalad amas without a problem. Ois Katan Tzadik Beis, the Mechaber said, Va'afilu im hakeroi meshupa. We can do this even if the roof is pitched. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ke'ein gagin shalanu, like our roofs, which are typically pitched. She'pia ba'al achsoin, where it's at an angle. The Kamash Malon and the Mechaber is teaching us, Shagam bepi tikra kazu, even with such a pi tikra, yored v'saisim, we still are allowed to employ the halacha l'moshe misinai pi tikra yored v'saisim. V'afta l'kamod b'siman shin samach aleph siv beis, even though later on in siman shin samach aleph siv beis, sasam ha-mechaber, the Mechaber is going to rule that when we have a pi tikra coming off of an angled roof, lo yamrin on pi tikra yored v'saisim, chilku ha'achrayim, the achrayim make a chilik. They say that there's a difference between our case over here and the case of Shin Samach Aleph. The Shani Hacha, over here it's different. Remember, what are we dealing with over here? We're dealing with the din d'Rabbanan of Karpef Yoser mi Beis Sasayim. But midaraisa, this entire area is a bona fide rishus hayachid. You have a 3-saw area that is completely enclosed by proper mechitzas that are 10 tvachim tall. Midaraisa, this entire area is a bona fide rishus hayachid, and you're allowed to carry in it yosim midal and amas. I don't care how big it is. We're dealing here with a din derabanan. If we have a karpef yosim mibeis sasayim, then midarabanan there's an iser to be metaltal like a carmelis. So over here, Shani Yachad ben Aterish Yachad Gamer Lukuliyama, Sharei Mukaf Arba Mechitzos, Ela Shekachamim Gazru Bekarpef Yosemi Beis Asayim. We're dealing with a din derabanan that applies to a karpef Yosemi Beis Asayim. Well, Lahachi, and therefore he kilu bepitikra afshepia mishipua. Therefore, over here, we're going to use P Tikra Yorid Vesaisim to divide between the 1-saw roofed area and the 2-saw non-roofed area to create 2 separate karpefs, each one of them which is not required to be hukaf l'shem dira, because one is 1-saw, the other one is 2-saw or less, but it's not more than 2-saw. So neither one has to be hukaf l'shem dira. We're going to be makel because we're dealing only with the nisa d'rabbanan here, and we're going to allow pitikra yard v'saisim. Ma'ashein ken hasam the nifratz mechitza over there in Shin Samach Aleph. We're talking about a totally different case. We're talking about a breach in a mechitza. Layamrinan yard v'saisim el imkein pia shaveh. Over there in Shin Samach Aleph, we could only use pitikra yard v'saisim if we're dealing with a flat, non-angled roof. Okay, moving along to Sif Yud Gimel. Interesting Sif. Now, this Sif is a little bit complex. The beginning of the complexity is that, like the Mishnah Berurah says, the language of the Mechaber is megumgum tzas. The language of the Mechaber is imprecise, and therefore it kind of makes it difficult to understand what's going on. I decided that the best way to do this is to show you the progression. I'm going to first show you what it sounds like the Mechaber is saying. Then I'll point out the issue that the Mishnah Berurah has on it, and then we'll see how the Mishnah Berurah modifies it. The Mishnah Berurah is going to modify the case. And it's interesting the way the Chavetz Chaim chose to do it. First, he's going to make a more basic modification to the case. Then he's going to modify the case a little bit more and make it a little bit more complex. But I have several diagrams over here. You all know how gifted I am when it comes to art. But I'm going to try and show you the progression that goes on over here between the Mechaber and the Mishnah Berurah. Let's see the Mechaber Sif Yud Gimel. Karpef Beis Sasayim Mitzumtzum. You have a karpef that is exactly 2-saw. So it's exactly 5,000 square amas. Now, a karpef that's exactly 5,000 square amas does not have to be hukaf l'shem dira, right? Even if it's hukaf shaloi l'shem dira, you're allowed to carry in it because it's a beis sasayim or less, but it's not yoser mi beis sasayim. It's not bigger than a beis sasayim. So, karpef beis sasayim mitzumtzum. You have a karpef which is exactly a beis sasayim. It's exactly 5,000 square amas. If you add 1 square amma to this karpef, you're in trouble. Because now it's yosim beis sasayim. Now you're not allowed to be metaltal in it. Yosim b'dal amas. But right now you are. Because it's exactly a beis sasayim. Karpef beis sasayim etzumtzum. V'chotzer. And it happens to be adjoining a chotzer. It's adjoining the yard of the house. Now, the yard of the house is hukaf l'shem dira. Now, the Mechaber doesn't point out to you over here that there is a mechitza between the karpef and the chotzer. So they're closed off from each other. You have the chotzer, which is attached to the house. It's the yard of the house. The chotzer is hukaf l'shem dira. So even if it's bigger than a beis sasayim, you're allowed to be metaltal dalan amas in the chotzer. Then, behind the chotzer, there's a karpef. Maybe that's where you store your firewood. You have wood-burning stoves. It's 15 degrees outside, and you need firewood. You keep your firewood in the karpef, which is behind your chotzer. And your chotzer and your karpef are divided by a mechitza. So now what do you have here? And now I'm going to show you my picture number 1. Okay? Here we have picture number 1. Okay, always works better if I turn off the light. Okay, let's turn off the light. So here is picture number 1, right? my handy pointer, you've got your house, and your house is surrounded by a chutzner. See, right there, it says chutzner. And it says that the chutzner is hukaf l'dira. So here's your house and your chutzner. I don't care how big this chutzner is. Even if it's yosim beis hasayim, you're allowed to be metaltal yosim b'dalad amas because it's hukaf l'dira. No problem. At the back of your chutzner, you have a fence. That's the dotted line here is the fence. Behind that fence, you have, oh wow, look at that. I wrote chutzner. That's a mistake. That should say karpef. Behind the chutzner, you have a karpef where you store your firewood, which is not hukaf l'shem dira. This is not hukaf l'shem dira. But you know how big it is? It's exactly a beis hasayim. So right now in this picture, you're allowed to be metaltal yosim b'dalad amas here in the chutzner. You're allowed to be metaltal yosim b'dalad amas over here in the karpef. Because even though the karpef is lo hukaf l'shem dira, it's not yosim b'beis hasayim. So right now everything is fine. But now is when you start to run into trouble. Okay, says the Mechaber, Karpef beis hasayim v'chotzer, shenifritzu b'miluam ze loze. Oh, now we have a problem. Come on. Now we have a problem that the arts and crafts devices aren't working properly. I'm telling you, I get messed up by this arts and crafts business all the time. Okay, let's try that. Okay, now is when we start getting difficult. So, the Mechaber said, you have this karpef beis hasayim v'chotzer, shenifritzu b'miluam ze loze. Now what happened is, your fence came down. This fence over here collapsed. You know what happens now? Now the chutzner, which is no problem, it's a chutzner that was hukaf l'dira, and the karpef is a problem, the karpef is not hukaf l'shem dira. Now they're open to each other because the fence collapsed. Okay? Says the Mechaber, what's the halacha? Ha-karpef oser. Now you're not allowed to be metaltal yosim b'dalad amas in the karpef. Why not, says the Mechaber? Mipnei shemekoyim ha-mechitza. The mechitza, the wall between the chutzner and the karpef, took up some room, right? Let's say it was built out of bricks. So let's say the bricks were 4 inches thick. So the wall was a 4-inch thick wall. Now the wall collapsed. Now that space, what does it belong to? Says the Mechaber, that space belongs to the karpef. Why does it belong to the karpef? That's a good question. Maybe we'll get to answer it, maybe we won't. But the wall, the space that the wall took up, says the Mechaber, belongs to the karpef. Now, while there was a mechitza in it, fine. While there was a mechitza in it, we didn't have to worry who it belonged to because it wasn't there. It was taken up by the mechitza. So long as the wall was there, the karpef was exactly a beis hasayim, no problem. The chutzner is hukaf l'dira, I don't care how big it is, no problem. But once the wall collapses, now the space that was taken up by the wall is bare, it's empty. Now we have to designate it somewhere. Says the Mechaber, it gets designated to the karpef. It gets designated to the karpef. Now the karpef is bigger than a beis hasayim. Now that the karpef is bigger than a beis hasayim, you're not allowed to be metaltal yosim b'dalad amas. So let's just read the words of the Mechaber again. Shebekoyim ha-mechitza, the space that the mechitza was occupying, miyasroi, it makes the karpef larger. Now that the mechitza is not there, the nasa yoser al sasayim, and now turns out that the karpef is bigger than a beis hasayim, and it's a karpef, and it's not hukaf l'dira. So now you're not allowed to carry inside the karpef. Now, some of you, I hope, are already yelling the question that the Mishnah Berurah is going to have. The question that the Mishnah Berurah is going to have flows directly from the words of the Mechaber. The way the Mechaber describes the case is, he says that the wall, he doesn't mention the wall, he doesn't mention that it collapsed, but he says, shenifritzu b'miluam ze lozeh. The case that the Mechaber would seem to be describing is that my dotted wall over here completely collapsed. Ay, ay, ay. Okay, it completely collapsed. Now, Rabbi say, if it completely, why am I so challenged with these things? I mamish don't know, Rabbi. You got to know what you're good at and what you're not good at. And I'm not good at this. All right. If this wall completely collapsed, then the chotzer is nifratz b'miluai to the karpef. Now, if you're telling me that the karpef is now considered to be yosim ibeis sosayim, because we've taken the space that was taken up by the wall, given it to the karpef, now the karpef is yosim ibeis sosayim, it's not hukuf ledira, now it's also to be metaltal yosim idal in the karpef, and you're telling me that the chotzer is nifratz b'miluai to the karpef, well then guess what? Then you're not allowed to be metaltal in the chotzer either, right? We've discussed this again and again and again in this Siman. If it's nifratz b'miluai, you're not allowed to carry there. So that's going to be the Mishnah Berurah's first problem, and that's why the Mishnah Berurah is going to modify the case. So now, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah's Kan Tzadik Gimel, first of all, the karpef is beis asayim mitzumtzum, v'lo yohayim hukaf ledira. And the karpef was not hukaf ledira. Ois Kan Tzadik Dalet shenifritzu b'miluam zeh lo zeh. The words of the Mechaber, the fence broke down completely, and the chotzer is completely breached to the karpef. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lashon begumgum. This Lashon obviously is imprecise. The be'emes, the truth is, im shneim nifritzu b'miluam, if it's true that they're completely breached one to the other, gam ha'chotzer aser, then you wouldn't be allowed to carry in the chotzer either. Sharehu pasuach uparetz l'karpef shenesar, because it's nifratz b'miluai l'makam ha'aser. It's completely breached to the karpef, which you're telling me is now a karpef yosim ibeis asayim shaloi hukav ledira. We are not allowed to be metatal yosim idal ramas. Ella, therefore, comes along the Chavetz Chaim and he makes his first modification to the case. Ella mayri shahaya hachotzer rochav mea karpef. What you have to say is that the chotzer, so you're coming off the house and you have the chotzer is wider than the karpef. V'nisharu gefufim mehatstadim. I think the best thing to do is to show you more of my artwork, and we'll deal with the challenges as they come. Okay, let's see. Okay. The chotzer, Rabbi Sai, this is the chotzer. The chotzer is wider than the karpef. And says the Mishnah Berurah, his words, V'nisharu gefufim me'atstadim, so that there are partial walls that remain. See these side walls of the chotzer, where the chotzer narrows to go out to the karpef. These two side walls over here, this is what we're calling gefufim. So there are partial walls. So when you come out of the house and you look through the chotzer to the karpef, you know what you see? You see partial walls dividing between the chotzer and the karpef. The Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us that those partial walls create enough of a division between the chotzer and the karpef that the chotzer is not considered nifratz b'miluai to the karpef. Even though from the karpef side to the chotzer, it is completely breached. If you're standing in the karpef and you look to the chotzer, you don't see any division whatsoever between the karpef and the chotzer, right? But when you look from the chotzer into the karpef, you're standing over here, and you look to the karpef, you see this little short wall here. Now, it's true that on the other side of that wall, there's no karpef, right? But you see something that looks like a divider between the chotzer and the karpef. Therefore, it's not halachically considered nifratz b'miluai, and we don't apply the halacha that it's nifratz b'miluai l'makam ha'aser, and the chotzer becomes also betiltel. So again, what's happening now is, the dotted line was the mechitza. The mechitza collapsed. The space that was occupied by the mechitza was given to the karpef. The karpef is now yosim ibeis asayim, and it's not hukaf ledira. So you're not allowed to be metaltal yosim idal ramas in the karpef. The chotzer is hukaf ledira. I don't care how big it is. You're allowed to be metaltal yosim idal ramas in the chotzer. Nifratz b'miluai l'makam ha'aser loi? No, it's not. Why? Because of these kifufim. Because of these short side walls, that makes enough of a division between the chotzer and the karpef that it's not considered nifratz b'miluai l'makayim ha'aser. Let's see it inside. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Again, halosha begum tzadik dalid be'emisim shteim nifratzu b'miluam. If it was truly completely breached, gam ha'chotzer aser, tiltal would be aser in the chotzer as well. Sharehu pasuachu paretz l'karpev shenesar, because it would be considered nifratz b'miluai l'makam ha'aser. Elamayri shaya chotzer rachav me'akarpev. We must be talking about a case where the chotzer is wider than the karpev. So there are partial short walls that come in where the chotzer narrows to go to the karpev. Those are called gifufim. Valkein hachotzer mutter. Therefore, the chotzer remains mutter. Deloi nifratz b'miluai la karpev, because it is not considered nifratz b'miluai to the karpev. Now the Mishnah Berurah adds another caveat. V'gam Mairi, and this is very tricky, Rabbi Isai. V'gam Mairi, the Chavetz Chaim says, we also must be talking about a case she'pirtzas ha'chotzer lo yahaya yoser me eser amos. This place where the wall collapsed and now the karpev is open to the chotzer is open to the karpev, that opening cannot be more than 10 amos. Says the Chavetz Chaim. That opening cannot be wider than 10 amos. If it was wider than 10 amos, then afilu nisharu gifufin, even though you have those short walls on the sides, shnei and asurin, it still would be considered nifratz b'miluai. Deshuv loy mikri pesach ela pirza. Very interesting what the Mishnah Berurah is doing here. The Mishnah Berurah is walking a dance. He's walking a tightrope over here, Rabbi Isai. What he's telling me is, he's saying, first of all, it can't be nifratz b'miluai mamish, like the Mechaber says, because if it's nifratz b'miluai, like the Mechaber says, the chotzer becomes aser. Nifratz b'miluai l'makam aser. Okay, so there must be gefufin. All right. The gefufin act like enough of a separation between the chotzer and the karpev that the chotzer is not considered nifratz b'miluai to the karpev. It doesn't become aser. But the opening between the chotzer and the karpev has to be less than 10 amos. You know why? Because if that opening would be more than 10 amos, then these gifufim wouldn't help. If that opening would be more than 10 amos, then it's yoytze me'ashir of a pesach, and no longer could be considered a pesach of any kind. Then it's nifratz b'miluai. I don't care if there are gefufim. Then it's already considered nifratz b'miluai, and then the chotzer would be nifratz b'miluai l'makam ha'aser, and then the chotzer would become aser. Okay. If you think we're finished with the Chavetz Chaim's modifications, we're not. Okay, tzadikei. The premise of the Mechaber's Isser over here, the Mechaber is saying that the karpev becomes Yosem Beis Asayim, it's Loyukuf Ledira, it becomes also Betiltal. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Shemikoyma Mechitza Miyatroi, because we take the area that was occupied in the Mechitza and we give it to the karpev. Now we made the karpev bigger. Now the karpev is Yosem Beis Asayim. Wonders the Mishnah Berurah. Wait a second. The mechitza collapsed. You're making the karpev bigger. Why? Only because of the area that was taken up by the mechitza. How about the chotzer? Why don't we say that the karpev is breached to the chotzer, and now all of the space of the chotzer combines with the karpev? Says the Chavetz Chaim, no, you don't say that. Shemekayim mechitza miyatroi. Da'aver achotzer eino yosehu yoser al beis asayim. We're not going to take space from the chotzer, give it to the karpev. In other words, we're not going to be mitztaref. We're not going to combine the chotzer with the karpev and now say that the karpev is Yosem Beis Asayim because it's breached to the chotzer. You know why? Mishum shehu aver amuter. Because we need to look, this is what the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying, we need to look at the karpev and the chotzer in isolation. Why? This is not like the earlier halachas that we had in the Siman. We had halachas in the Siman. You had a chotzer, the whole chotzer was hukaf ledira, then you planted tomatoes. So now you took part of the chutzner and you turned it into a karpef. So now we have to deal with the overall size of the chutzner, the size of the tomato patch. Right? But that's because it was all one area. It was all a chutzner that was hukaf ledira. Then you took some space and you planted a tomato patch. That's how it's happening here. Over here there was a chutzner and there was a karpef. And they were divided by a wall. The wall fell down. Now, we don't look at the chutzner and the karpef as being one. We still look at them in isolation. We still look at the karpef as being a karpef and the chutzner as being a chutzner. The only problem is the area that was taken up by the wall. The area that was taken up by the wall is now bare, and it has to belong to someone. Mechaber says it belongs to the karpef. It belongs to the karpef. Now the karpef is too big. Now it's Yosef Beis Hasayim. It has to be Hukal Ladira. It's not. So it's also to be Metaltal Yosef B'Dalid. But we're not going to take land from the chutzner and give it to the karpef. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Avra chutzner, Eino Yisrael Beis Hasayim, Mishum Shu Avra Mutter. The chutzner was Hukaf Ladira, and it still is Hukaf Ladira. We're not going to take land away from the chutzner, give it to the karpef, and call it not Hukaf Ladira. It is Hukaf Ladira. The area where the mechitza was is not Hukaf Ladira. Rak mokem shoy mechitza she'ena b'klal hachotzer. That part, that patch of land that the mechitza was standing on, never belonged to the chotzer. Now, in case some of you are wondering, there are those that ask, what do you mean it never belonged to the chotzer? Technically, based on Shin Mem Hey, it technically did belong to the chotzer, right? Because what's the halach of the top of the wall? As long as that wall was standing, the top of that wall was a rishus hayachid. So, chayra, the space of the wall really did belong to the chotzer. Complicated. Okay. So now, nitztarif ata im akarpef v'yisrael Yisroel Beis Hasayim. All right. Ois gotten tzadik vav. Then nasa Yisroel Hasayim. Now the karpef is Yisroel Hasayim. Now comes along the Chavetz Chaim, and the Chavetz Chaim gives us some final modifications to this case. Just let's make it a little bit more complicated. Okay. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Ois gotten tzadik vav. And guess what? We're going to dance a little bit more. We also have to be talking about a case shekoslei karpef, where the side walls of the karpef nichnosin b'soich chalal hachotzer b'bifnim, extend into the chotzer. Or the gefufim, and I'll show you this in a diagram, or the gefufim, right, where the chotzer narrowed, those short walls have to be longer than 4 amas each. If not, if you don't have one of those two situations, then we're not going to consider the chotzer and the karpef breach to each other. What is the Mishnah Berurah saying? What the Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying is as follows. Again, the whole premise, I'm going to start with the previous picture. The whole premise of the Mechaber's halacha is that the dotted line wall between the chotzer and the karpef collapsed. Now that they collapsed, that space belongs to the karpef. The karpef is now Yosef Beis Hasayim, and not allowed to be metaltal more than daled amas inside the karpef. And the Mishnah Berurah told us, but still, the chotzer and the karpef are not nifratz b'miluai one to the other. Why? Because you have these short walls. You have the gefufim on each side. Now the Mishnah Berurah throws in another caveat. The Mishnah Berurah is very bothered. You know what the Mishnah Berurah is bothered by? The Mishnah Berurah says, if you have these gefufim, we said that these gefufim create a mechitza, sort of, between the chotzer and the karpef. Because if not, the chotzer is nifratz b'miluai to the karpef, and then the chotzer would be usher to say where the karpef is usher. So on some level, Rabbi Isai, we're saying that these gefufim do create a mechitza between the chotzer and the karpef. Now that bothers the Mishnah Berurah, because if we're saying that there actually is a halachic mechitza between the chotzer and the karpef, then maybe we should say that it's as if the mechitza is still there. And if it's as if the mechitza is still there, why did the karpef become Yosef Beis Hasayim? On a high level, that seems to be what's bothering the Mishnah Berurah. So the Mishnah Berurah came up with a way to solve the problem. The way the Mishnah Berurah solved the problem was, he said, okay, let's modify the case a little bit more. What we're going to do is, we're going to say, not only is the chotzer wider than the karpef, so that you have gifufim, okay? You have gifufim, but the side walls of the karpef, they intersect the gifufim. The side walls of the karpef are niknas l'soicha chotzer. They extend into the chotzer, so that they bisect the gifufim on both sides. You know what that does? That prevents us from halachically extending these walls through the gap. The gifufim still make, well, what the tightrope, Rabbi say? The gifufim still make that we don't call the chotzer nifratz b'miluai to the karpef. Because the bottom line is somebody standing in the chotzer looks to the karpef, he sees those side walls as being a divider. So it's not nifratz b'miluai to the karpef, and therefore when the karpef becomes also the chotzer does not. But here's the tightrope. The side walls of the karpef bisect, they cut off the gifufim on both sides. So halachically we cannot extend the mechitza. Or alternately, says the Chavetz Chaim, maybe the side walls of the karpef do not extend into the chotzer. But then you have to say that these walls are longer than dalet amos. Why do they have to be longer than dalet amos? This is somewhat complex, and now's not the time and place for it, but I can't leave you hanging. As long as they're shorter than dalet amos, we could look at them as being the start of a wall that we could say halachically continues even when it's physically not present. But once the wall is 4 amos, it's a wall, it's a chashav of mechitza in its own right. And since it's a chashav of mechitza in its own right, we don't extend it. If the wall is less than dalet amos, it's not chashav in its own right. So then we extend it and we make it longer. But if it's 4 amos, it's chashav in its own right, and then we don't extend it. But the gist of what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, the Mishnah Berurah is trying to create a situation where we cannot really extend these gifufim to say that they mamish cut off the chotzer from the karpef. So again, we're walking a tightrope. They have to cut off the chotzer from the karpef enough so that we don't say nifratz b'miluah l'makom aser. But they have to break it off, but they can't break it off fully, because if they would break it off fully, then the halach of the mechaber wouldn't start. That seems to be what the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here in Ois Koton Tzadik Vav. Again, let's read it inside. V'nasi Yisroel Sasayim. You have to say that the side walls of the karpef extend into the chotzer. Or you have to say that the gifufim are each longer than dalet amos. If you don't have one of these situations, ein zeh nikrad nifratz b'miluai, it wouldn't be called breached. Now, there are those that ask a kasha on this Mishnah Berurah. The Chazon Ish is one of them. Again, the wording of the Mishnah Berurah seems to suggest that if you don't have one of these two situations, then it's not nifratz b'miluai. But if it is nifratz b'miluai. Yeah, but the Mishnah Berurah just finished telling us a little while ago that it can't be nifratz b'miluai, because if it would be nifratz b'miluai, it would be nifratz b'miluai l'makom ha'aser. Chazon Ish is very bothered by this Mishnah Berurah. I'm trying to give you a pshat in the Mishnah Berurah that seems to work. We do what we do. Okay. With that, let's move on. Let's go to Sif Yadalit. Let's do the final Sif here in Siman Shin Nun Ches, says the Mechaber. This Sif really is very simple. Again, we have a little bit of a problem that the lashon of the Mechaber is ktsas megumgum, but essentially we're dealing with a halacha that we already learned. Let's see the Mechaber. Karpef yoyse mibeis hasayim shaloi hukaf l'dira. You have a karpef yoyse mibeis hasayim. It's bigger than 5,000 square amos. It is loy hukaf l'dira. Okay, so let's imagine. You know what? Let's take a look right away at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton tzadik zayin. Pasach by Pesach. We didn't learn those words in the Mechaber yet, but it doesn't matter. I want to see the Mishnah Berurah right away so you understand the case. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Lashon Megumgum Ksas, the language over here is a little imprecise. Uvimikar hadvarim. When you look at the source material that the Mechaber is coming from, when you look at the Rosh, Tosfos, etc., you look at the Rishonim that the Mechaber was coming from, Mavur b'yoser. In the source material, the case is better described. What happened is like this. Shehismech shloisha ksalim b'soif kaisel beisai. Somebody built a house, okay? The house has a backyard. Now, he wanted to enclose the backyard. So he went to one side of his house, right? And he extended a mechitza. Coming off the right side of his house, he extended a mechitza. Going out, out to enclose the backyard. On the left side of the house, he extended the mechitza, going out to enclose the backyard. And then at the end of his backyard, he made another mechitza to close off the back of the backyard. So now his backyard is hukaf. What is it hukaf by? 4 mechitzas. What are the 4 mechitzas? 3 fences that he built and the back wall of the house, right? Those are the 4 walls that enclose his karpef, his chotzer, his yard. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah. So, hismech shloisha ksalim b'soif kaisel beisai. He made 3 walls enclosing the area in the back of his house. He was hismech. He attached them to his house. He attached the right wall to his house. He attached the left wall to his house. And then at the back, he made his 4th wall. V'kaisel beisai ha'yakaisel revi. What's the 4th wall of this enclosure? The back wall of the house. Ubai asa pesach. And he made a door in the house that goes out to the backyard. But there's a problem. V'zeu shekasav ha'mechaber u'pasach by pesach. That's the explanation of when the Mechaber is going to say he made a door. Upasach by Pesach. It means that he made a door going from the house out to the backyard. Ella, but here's where he goofed. Ella, but Shaloi Pasach HaPesach Rak Achar HaKafa Shalak Salam. But he didn't make the back door going to the backyard until after he built his 3 mechitzas and he enclosed the backyard. Delay Mahani, Kamavur Leil. So guess what? His backyard is loy hukaf ladira. So Rabbi Isai, very simple. What happened over here? He built a house. The house does not have a back door. After he finished building the house, he enclosed his backyard by building 3 fences around the backyard. What's the 4th wall of that enclosure? The back wall of the house. Then he went ahead, got the door guy, and the door guy busted a door open from the back of the house to go into the yard. Okay, this is classic. Not hukaf ladira. The enclosure came first, and only then came the door from the house to the enclosure. So it is loy hukaf ladira. If it's bigger than a beis hasayim, which it is, right? Karpef yosim be beis hasayim, said the Mechaber, you're not allowed to be metaltal, yosim adal adamas, inside this backyard. But we know, Rabbi Isai, that there are ways to remedy this situation, right? So now let's jump back into the Mechaber. Karpef yosim be beis hasayim shaloi hukaf ladira. You have this backyard that is Yosef Beis Hasayim, and it was not Hukaf Ladira. Why, says the Mechaber? Because Upasach by Pesach, because he only opened the door from the house to the backyard after he made the enclosure. That's when he opened up the door. So now it's not Hukaf Ladira. Oh, but he learned Shinun Ches. So he knows the Eitzah. He knows how to remedy the situation. What does he do? V'asa Mechitza Lefanav Yoser Me'asara. Oh, you know what he's going to do? He's going to go to, let's say, the back wall of the backyard, and he's going to go to Home Depot, and he's going to buy those beautiful wooden fencing panels that are more than 10 tefachim tall, and he's going to put up a new mechitza inside of the old mechitza, and he's going to make it more than 10 amas wide. This is one of the eitzes that we learned about earlier, how to remedy the situation. How does that remedy the situation? Because by building the new section of mechitza inside the yard, inside the old mechitza, and by making it 10 tefachim tall and 10 amas wide, you're obviating the section behind it. Once you obviate the section behind it, you are mevatel all the mechitzas. The new mechitza you're putting up l'shem dira. So when you finish putting it up, now the whole backyard is hukaf l'shem dira, because you put up the new mechitza after you made the door into the backyard. Now remember one caveat, which is that the new mechitza that you're building inside of the old mechitza has to be at least 3 tvachim, has to be more than 3 tvachim, away from the old mechitza. If it's within sheer lavud of the old mechitza, it's not considered that you're building a new mechitza, it's considered that you're building an extension onto the old mechitza. So you've got to bring it inboard more than sheer lavud away from the pre-existing wall, the outside wall. But this guy successfully remedied the situation. Mamish Kavaldik. He learned Dirshu, he learned Shin and Ches, he chazed, he remembers it. He goofed, he enclosed his backyard before he made the door from the house. It was loy hukaf ledira. He said, no problem. He put up a new mechitza, 10 amos wide, 10 tfachim tall, more than sheer lavud away from the old mechitza. He obviated the old mechitza. Now he's using the new mechitza. It's hukaf l'shem dira, shalom al Yisroel. He can be metal to yosim medal amos in the backyard. But you know what happened then? He remedied the situation, but he didn't do a good job. Halachically, he did a great job, but he didn't do a good job in construction. He belongs in the Bismedrash, not doing construction, and his new wall fell down. So his new wall was up for 6 months, and then the new wall fell down. Now that the new wall fell down, what's he using? He's using the old wall. The old wall was not hukav l'shem dira. Says the Mechaber, chayzer li'isurai. It's now once again also to be metal yosim medal amos inside this yard, because now once again it's considered loy hukav l'shem dira. Says the Mishnah Berurah. I'm going to read again from the beginning of Tzadik Zayin because I don't know where I cut off. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he extended 3 mechitzas to enclose his backyard, coming off the back wall of his house. The wall of the house was the 4th wall of the enclosure. And he made a doorway from the house into the backyard in that back wall of the house. And that's what the Mechaber means when he says he opened the doorway. Ella, because he made a door going from the house to the backyard. Ella, shaloi pasach pesach rak achar ha'akafa shalak solim. But he goofed halachically because he only opened up the door from the house into the yard after he enclosed the backyard. The loy mahani, come over leil, it's loy hook of ladira. Ulahachi, and to remedy the situation, also bekarpeif mechitza chadasha. He put up a new section of wall inside. That new section he's putting up, l'shem dira, because that's going up after he made the doorway from the house. Umavur sham oid de gamma mechitza chadasha asa pesach. Okay, he made, I left out this little detail over here. He made a door in the new wall so that he could go through it and use the rest of the karpef. Okay. He made a new section of wall inside. He made the new wall inboard more than sheer lavud away from the old wall. Tzadik tes yoisem asara, it's more than 10 amos wide. Okay, shita samachaber b'sivav the mahani b'sher zeh. The Mechaber told us earlier, if you make a new section of wall that's more than 10 amos wide, you're okay. Vayin shah masha kasavda b'bir alocha. Ois cotton kuf achakach nafla, and then the new section of wall collapsed. V'wadin imipila b'yadayim, or he took it down. Kedei lismay chala mechitza rishana. Gam ken loy mahani. Ois cotton kuf aleph. Chayzer li'isurai. V'loy amrinon kevitchak karpev hutar pamachas ene chayzer li'isurai. What's the chiddush over here? The chiddush is, you might have thought, once the guy went to Home Depot, bought the fence panels, and put up a new fence, and he made it hukaf l'dira, maybe that status change remains forever, even after the mechitza fell down. No, we don't say that. The new mechitza fell down after 5 years. You're now relying on the old wall again. You're relying on the old wall. The old wall was loy hukav l'shem dira. Kasva Paiskim. Paiskim right. Interesting halacha. Same scenario. The house with the backyard. The 4th wall of the enclosure of the backyard is what? The back wall of the house. Kasva Paiskim. The Paiskim right. In our scenario, where one wall that's enclosing the backyard is the back wall of the house, and everything was wonderful. You built the house, you made a door going from the back of the house out to the yard, Then you enclose the yard. Mamish gewaldig. Hukaf l'shem dira, everything is great. V'nafal ha'koisel. Now the back wall of the house fell down. So you got this case, Rabbi Yisai? You built a house. You made a back door going from the house to the backyard. Then you enclosed the backyard. Gewaldig. The yard is hukaf l'shem dira. Even if it's yosim b'beis hasayim, you're allowed to be metaltal. No problem. It's hukaf l'shem dira. V'nafal ha'koisel. But now the back wall of the house collapsed. Now let's stop for a second. The back wall of the house collapsed. Is the backyard still enclosed? Yes, it is. You know why? Because the back wall of the house is not the only wall of the house. The back wall of the house collapsed. So now you're standing in the backyard, you're looking into the house. You're looking into the bedroom, into the master bedroom. You're looking into the playroom, right? But there are interior walls to the house. There are side walls to the house. There's a front wall to the house. So the backyard is still enclosed, right? The house is still there. The back wall of the house fell down, but the house didn't fall down. So l'chayra, the backyard is still enclosed, right? And it was hukaf l'shem dira. Say the Paiskim, no, this doesn't work. Even though the interior walls of the house still exist, and they're still enclosing the karpef, the backyard, now it's also to be metaltal yosim medal ramas in the yard. Why? Were those interior walls of the house constructed in order to enclose the backyard? No. You want to argue that the back wall of the house was made to enclose the backyard? That you could argue, because the exterior wall of the house is a separation between the yard and the interior of the house, between the exterior and the interior. So yes, you could argue that the back wall of the house served to enclose the backyard, but the living room wall didn't serve to enclose the backyard. So now you could no longer consider the karpef hukaf l'shem dira. Okay, that brings us to the end of a very fascinating Siman Shin Ches. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. This lesson of Liman HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should send Yeshua for us, Parnas, and Shadduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the BS Kal Tzedek B'Meher V'Yameinu. Amen. Be well.